Hi, I'm Susan Hand Shetterly, and I wrote the book called Swimming Home. And I'm going to read it to you today. But first, I want to talk for a minute about migration. Maine has a lot of rivers and streams, and lots of species of fish migrate up those streams and down those streams if they're not stopped by dams or culverts. And so we have fish that make these runs: the shad, the eels, the sea run brook trout, smelt, and salmon, and of course, alewives. And many of you probably have seen the alewives coming up in schools. And if not, you probably don't have to drive very far with your parents or a friend to get to a stream or a river that will show you the spring run in May and June. Lots of animals migrate. We know that birds do. They're nesting here, and caribou gallop across the Alaskan tundra. And they're birds that nest in the trees and on the ground and in marshes. And even frogs and salamanders migrate. They come from under the sphagnum or under the logs in the spring, and they go to the spring pools to spawn, and then they go back to the woods again. So the thing that's interesting about fish is when, especially alewives, when they migrate, they're totally quiet. You just see them going. They're so focused, but they're very quiet. So this is the story about an alewife, which is a fish, of course, and her name is Pesca. And this is about how she reached her home pond, guiding her school of fish along with her. So I'm just going to start reading to you. And Pesca raced through the ocean with the other alewives in her school as winter winds whipped the water into steep waves and sleet fell. They were hunting tiny animals that drifted in clusters, sometimes near the surface of the water and sometimes deeper where the light was dim. The alewives swam fast and close together. Often they looked like one big fish, flashing silvery scales, but there were many fish with gray-green backs, silver bellies, and sharp tails. Behind the curve of their gill covers on each side, they were marked with a small dark spot. When spring came and the full moon shone down, shadows of birds moved across it. The birds were flying north. Pesca and her school felt something pulling them. It was Lily Lake, where they had hatched from eggs in water that was not salty like this ocean water, but sweet and muddy. The year before, in a springtime much like this one, Pesca, the oldest and biggest alewife, had led her school back to Lily Lake to spawn, their eggs drifting down to the bottom. Now she would do it again. Slowly they turned and headed north with the birds, as the alewives before them had done for thousands of years. They joined other schools of alewives, making one enormous, glittering school. Ahead of them, going the same way, raced a pod of porpoises. A humpback whale rose out of the water and splashed down as they hurried beneath its huge shadow. But soon Pesca and her school left the other alewives and swam on their own toward a cove where the familiar smell of Lily Lake wound through the water like a wide ribbon. A boy out with his father in a rowboat leaned over the side and noticed sudden bright, bold flashes of silver, first one, then another, and then the dark backs. "Dad," he said, "the alewives are here." They watched a harbor seal chase the fish. Pesca and her school dashed from the seal and flashed past the rowboat, tracking that ribbon of lake water to the mouth of Lily Stream. To reach Lily Lake, the alewives would have to fight their way up the stream, flooded with snowmelt and spring rain, but they weren't quite ready to enter it yet. When they came to it, they circled back into the cove. Years ago, when your grandfather was a boy, the boy's father said as he rowed, he'd come to Lily Stream in May with a dip net and fish for alewives with his dad. They'd salt them and put them in a smokehouse they built on the bank right over there. They used wood chips to make the smoke. Your grandfather said nothing tasted as good as a freshly salted and smoked alewife. Why don't we do that? The boy asked. There aren't enough left anymore. Now every fish that returns needs a chance to spawn. The next day, when the tide was high and the salt water in the cove rose against the water of the stream, the alewives were ready. Pesca plunged in, ducking between two giant rocks. She shimmied one way, she shimmied another. The other alewives followed beside her. Up they went, darting past rocks and sunken logs. When one of them spotted a bald eagle flying overhead, he swerved behind a log, and all the other alewives scattered and hid. The bird dropped from the sky. It splashed into the stream and rose again, its talons empty. It shook itself and flew away, and the alewives continued their journey. Once Pesca hung in a slow eddy between two sticks, but they were not sticks. They were the long, thin legs of a great blue heron. When the bird saw Pesca, it stabbed its beak into the water. Just before it grabbed her, she shot upstream again. The alewives arrived at a deep pool. They would not eat while they made their way to Lily Lake, but here they rested, fanning their tails back and forth in the quiet water. Then they began again and didn't stop until they reached a beaver dam that stretched from bank to bank before them. Over the top of the dam skimmed a sheet of water, and water poured through gaps where branches and stones and mud had come loose. One by one, thrashing their tails, the alewives turned sideways and skimmed over the top, or they wiggled through the open spaces in the dam. They swam slowly in the beaver pond beside the round dome of the lodge. Two beavers sat on the lodge, gnawing the bark of green saplings and watching the fish as rain began to fall. Raindrops puckered the surface of the water. Night fell. The rain slowed and stopped. A barred owl called out, "Hoo hoo, hoo hoo, ah." When the sun rose, the alewives started upstream again. Ahead of them, they heard a clattering noise that shook the banks. As they got closer, the sound grew louder. A brand new road ran across Lily Stream. Over it, cars sped. Under the road, a pipe lay on a pile of stones. The lovely water of Lily Lake poured through it and splashed down into the stream. The people who had set the pipe under the road had forgotten about the alewives. The fish shimmied and jumped. They slid and skidded. They somersaulted and backflipped, but they couldn't reach the pipe. Pesca and her school had come a long way. They had escaped the seal and the bald eagle and the great blue heron. But if they couldn't swim through that pipe, they couldn't get to Lily Lake, though it was just on the other side of the road. Pesca rushed again at the falling water. It tossed her back. She tried again. This time the water flipped her sideways into a puddle on the bank. Another alewife fell next to her. They twisted and flapped, but they were stuck. That was when the boy and his father, who had seen the alewives in the cove, came walking along the stream bank looking for the fish. There they are, said the boy, but the pipe's too high for them. Let's help. These two first, said his father. Get your hands wet so you don't hurt their skin, and be careful. People don't call them saw bellies for nothing. The scales on their bellies are sharp. The boy dipped his hands into the stream. Gently he lifted Pesca and carried her across the road. He held her in the water of the lake. Pesca moved a little. She took a breath, then another. She fanned her tail back and forth. She felt a surge of life, twisted out of the boy's hands and darted away as the alewife who had fallen beside her swam from the father's hands. Together, the two alewives circled back as the boy's father ran to get buckets. He and his son began to scoop up other fish, carrying them across the road and pouring them into the lake. Back and forth they went, scooping and pouring as more and more alewives gathered next to Pesca. Soon, every fish in the school was safe in Lily Lake. When they finished, the boy and his dad sat by the shore. They looked out over the water. They couldn't see the alewives, but they knew the fish were there. The trouble is more will be coming, the father said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. I'm not sure what we'll do about them. Neighbors will help us, the boy said. We can all bring buckets to carry the alewives across the road. That's a good idea. You know, we saved some special fish today, and I bet right now they're celebrating. The boy laughed. Dad, do fish really celebrate? Just then, Pesca broke the water surface in a flash of the most beautiful silver. She flipped her tail high like the wave of a hand and disappeared with all the other alewives deep into Lily Lake. I hope you all get to see some alewives moving up from their streams and rivers into lakes to spawn. Thank you for listening.